There was one woman I spoke to who said she was sat down by her line manager when she returned and she was told, don't talk about the child at work. There are people here that don't have children and don't want children, so it's not okay to mention the child, but you can talk about your pets.
To succeed and thrive at C-suite level, you need strategic clarity and operational excellence. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the C-Suite Framework podcast. If you are listening to this in real time, it is early autumn, a time to hopefully gather your thoughts between now and the end of the year for what you want to achieve, to reset. For a lot of people, it's the genuine start of the year and for what it's worth, one of my absolute favourite times. In terms of things that I have coming up in the coming months, I'm excited to say that I will be the keynote speaker at the AGRC Risk Conference in Cyprus in early November. I'm also working with the Lord Mayor of London and City St George's Bayes University on launching a CRO network. If you are a CRO, take a look on LinkedIn and you will find some links in terms of how to join that one. And for my own personal development, I am going to be taking a certificate in geopolitical analysis with Florida Atlantic University and RAIN to help hopefully sharpen my pencil when I'm looking at the world of geopolitics and how it impacts on leadership. A quick note to say that my courses are continuing to go from strength to strength, and my How to Be a Chief Risk Officer course is shortly launching with Premia, the Professional Risk Managers International Association, on the 1st of October. But even between now and then, you can access the courses on my website, www.csuiteframework.com/courses. And for any of the courses, if you enter the code CSF podcast, you will get 10% off any of the courses. That's CSF podcast. Today's podcast is with Clare Radford, and it's entitled How to Run a Business with a Conscience. Clare is a supremely experienced organizational psychologist, a long career delivering consultancy to clients, big transformational culture and people programs. But she has founded her own consultancy and brought all of that data, all of that research, all of that knowledge to helping clients show and ensure that they genuinely value their people and get the best out of their people. And it's very data driven and smart. And there's good science behind everything that she's doing. And dare I say it, something tells me there may be a book in it for her at some point along the way as well. Clare has been nominated as Entrepreneur of the Year 2025, and it's a really great listen. So hope all is well. Hope you enjoy this podcast. Let's cross over to Clare. Clare, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. What a lovely intro.
Well, it's quite an impressive story, and I think we might just dig straight in if that's okay with you. And maybe you can just tell us a bit more about that career trajectory, how you came to found your own organization, and maybe some of your key pivot points.
So, as you've already mentioned, occupational psychology is a big part of it. I've always been interested in that topic, although I didn't know that's what it was when I was younger. I remember quite distinctly seeing my mum and dad coming home from work when I was younger and having two very different experiences. So my dad would come home from work full of energy, engaged, loving life, loving his job. And my mum, who was a social worker, she had a very difficult job, would come home completely drained, demotivated, frustrated. So I became very interested from a young age in the difference. You know, how do we understand that difference? And how do we make sure that more people had an experience like my dad and less like my mum? And so that was the path that led me to business psychology. And from there, my first professional role was at Jaguar Land Rover, so a fantastic British brand. And at the time that I joined, they were bought by Tata, big Indian conglomerate. And I got to play a part in the huge culture change program that then unfolded. So that was a fantastic pivotal moment to really understand how to do culture change properly, to engage with your workforce and understand what they wanted. And ultimately, it saved the business going through that change. So that was a great start to my career. And with Jaguar Land Rover, I also went and lived and worked in China for a little bit as well. So that was a great adventure, both from a personal perspective, but also it really opened my eyes to how Western centric our ways of working can be and thinking about people and culture, I had to totally transform the way I was working over there. So that was another eye-opening experience in many ways. And then from there, I went into leadership development. So worked at a consultancy where I really learned about the skills of creating learning experiences that stick with people. So picked up some of those skills there, and then finally went in-house. So I was head of a talent department at Green King, which is a pub company, very big part of my life and a really fun place to work for a few years before I then set up Culture Consultancy.
Amazing. I mean, is it so much to kind of unpick there? The China experience. I remember one of the first times I went with Barclays to Singapore, and I sort of laid out, look, here's what I think we're going to do for the next 2 days. And I laid out, right, does anyone have any problems with that? And I remember the fear in the eyes around the table that I had just arrived from London. I had laid out what I was going to do and then openly invited everyone around the table to challenge me on what I had just said. Needless to say, nobody said a word. It was just such an early learning in terms of, oh my goodness, I just invited conflict and I've terrified everybody, but just a little vignette. And I'm sure you had years of that kind of experience of learning.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think almost everyone that has done that move has had that experience. And you kind of have to go through that in order to really understand how to get the best out of people in a very, very different culture. Something it forced me to do was really hone my coaching skills, because actually going in with those very open questions, perhaps inviting conflict, is not how to get things done. Instead, you have to ask lots of questions and really listen for the nuanced answers.
I can't resist but just to ask you for a little insight. I loved what you said about learning experiences that stick. And as someone who is creating online courses and content, give us something in terms of how you think about that.
I love to use simulations and play as part of the learning experiences I create. So I've done a simulation recently, which was all built around Formula One. I play double with people. We use Lego. I think it's really important that the world we're living in now is just so full of information, whether it's through Google or ChatGPT. We are bombarded with information. And so in the world of L&D, you have to work really hard to get learning to stick. And I think part of that is having a point, so something that people can take away and use immediately, but also making it memorable, injecting some fun and some play into that is a really good way of making it work.
And that classic, I guess, show, don't tell, right? When you do something in a simulation, you're learning it rather than being told it. So, Claire, it was in your bio. You took a huge risk. You left a steady job. You had young kids. What gave you the courage and the strength and the energy to do that?
Loads of coffee in terms of the energy, but I guess the courage. Well, I'm a real nerd at heart. I love collecting data. So my first port of call was collecting data, and that meant talking to lots of people. So my boss at the time, who was fantastic, my husband, I spoke to people that had done it and been successful, people who'd done it and had been unsuccessful. So data was the first thing, but then I needed a really compelling reason. And as someone who's been through the same, I'm sure you had to find that compelling reason. And for me, it was, again, going back to my childhood, I wanted to make sure that I was the parent who was coming home from work, role modelling what it is to have a fantastic career. And for me, that means having a bit more control and autonomy over the type of work I'm doing, the people I'm working with, the way that I work, and also when I work. So if I want to take time off to go and watch Sports Day or the Christmas Nativity, I can do that now. And I'm loving working for myself.
Amazing. Yeah, it certainly gives freedoms and openness, and I think a focus, doesn't it? Because everything that you do is in furtherance of your mission, and there's no sort of waste, is there, around the side? It's full on. Obviously, it sounds like it's going well. Maybe just tell us a little, congratulations, finalist at British Entrepreneur of the Year Awards. Tell us a bit about that. What's that been like and what's that done for you?
Very exciting. I mean, when I got the email to say I was a finalist, I assumed it was spam and deleted it. And then I kept getting emails to say, no, you're actually a finalist. And I finally spoke to a few people, and then I got a letter from my MP congratulating me. And it took all of that for me to actually believe the fact that I was a finalist. So it's been fantastic. And if I'm really honest, I feel like I've already won. Just to be nominated and in the final with some fantastic new organisations is such an amazing feeling. And for me, it was all about creating this consultancy with a conscience and doing work that betters lives. And my mission is to improve working lives. And I think to have that recognised is just so lovely, because you do doubt yourself sometimes. You think, is this just really naive to try and do the right thing?
And that's a brilliant segue, I guess, to my next question, Claire, so I wanted to kind of frame this and be a little challenging, I guess, but it's easy to do the right thing when it's easy, when things are going well, when there's plenty of cash around and good budget, and when there's no real trade-off, when there's no real pain to doing the right thing. I think when the rubber hits the road, particularly I think in a cycle like the current time, where budgets are tight, we're not in a particularly good economic cycle. There's not a lot of money sloshing around the system. And we're also in some quite polarized political times as well, when putting your neck out, can be dangerous. So in these times, what happens when doing the right thing can actually harm your business?
I think that is the moment which it matters most, because that is when people are looking at what you're doing. To do the right thing when there's nothing at stake, when there's no cost, it's forgettable, it's run of the mill. But when you're doing the right thing and it costs you and it costs your business, that's when people pay attention. And I suppose I've had a few experiences of that since I've set up my own business. The risks are a lot higher. I'm not guaranteed an income. But I have tried to be really vocal on some public forums, LinkedIn and social media. When I don't agree with certain things, I will say it. And I've had comments removed from official pages on LinkedIn. But I really do try and stand up for what I think is right in business and for working lives. And something I have experienced loads, and I bet you've had this experience as well, is being asked to do work for free. When I first set up my business as a self-employed female, I was bombarded with requests to go and talk at conferences, to do coaching, to deliver training for free. And whilst it was really tempting, because I was being tempted in with these, offers of exposure and branding and a platform at a time when my business wasn't turning over much money, that is a real temptation. But I knew that is not the right thing. It sets this totally unrealistic expectation that self-employed women will and should work for free. So as much as it pained me, I, would turn that down and explain these are the reasons why. And there's this fantastic woman that I listen to every word she says, Cindy Gallop, and she talks about this a lot. And she always responds to those requests with a really simple phrase, which is, fuck that, pay me. And I just love that.
That's fantastic. And so true. Like, we get invites all the time, and almost like you're being done a favor, like we're doing you a favor by having you come and speak at our conference and so on. And I always, even a small value, I always try and put a small value on something in that kind of, because if it's worth doing, it's worth paying for. If it's not worth doing, and if we all couldn't be bothered and if there's better things to do, it also sharpens the focus on the value that's being given and being created. So I love that. And I agree with it. It's tough out there, isn't it? So, Claire, you founded your own consultancy. You're finding your way, you're taking clients on board. What are the issues that your clients and prospective clients are grappling with? What are you being asked about?
Ooh, okay. Well, maybe not being asked about, but something I am definitely observing is that the return to office mandates are killing engagement. In the world of people and culture, all I see is data on this. So Gallup and McKinsey and all the big research houses are showing us and showing businesses forcing everyone back to the office is not working. And I think this is against a backdrop of a real talent issue across the UK and Europe. We've got a very small group of mobile talent, and these return to office mandates are making it harder for brilliant people to find great jobs in a location that suits them because they're being forced back to the office. And I think this is against a backdrop of just ever decreasing engagement anyway. There was a Gallup survey last week that told us manager engagement has fallen again to below 30%. I don't have the data on this, but I think that is because our expectations of a career and work are changing. We know we spend a third of our lives at work. We're not happy anymore to sit in a miserable grey office and be on Zoom calls from 9 to 5. We want more autonomy. We want to feel fulfilled. But in order to get to those things, we need leaders that understand people. And that's the other conversation that I am having with clients. It's the real need for that human-centered leadership against a huge tidal wave of AI that is all we hear about, isn't it, at the moment? So I think things like empathy, listening, understanding, motivating, those skills are becoming more important and more valuable than ever before. I love to always come back to this one piece of research. It was the Gallup Workplace Survey. And it says the single best indicator of workplace engagement is having a best friend at work. And I just think that's so lovely. And I think no matter how good AI gets, you can't create that. That is all down to people and culture. So these topics are only going to become more important, I think.
There's so much in that to unpack, isn't there? But the promise of AI is, hyper curation. We'll be able to personalize your career journey, personalize your training and development. And actually, if anything, what the early indications seem to be is it's doing the opposite. It's dehumanizing, it's leveling, it's making everything the same. On that, do you have advice for people trying to leverage the efficiencies that come with AI, but trying to keep it human as well?
I think it's all about conversation. So the organisations that I have worked with who are doing it well are constantly in conversation with their staff about this stuff. So first of all, they upskill them so people know exactly how to use AI, but also understand the limitations of it. And then they're injecting the human element by creating forums where you can discuss it. How is it working well for us? What are the limitations? What are the right use cases? And where would we absolutely never use AI? And I think it is going to be that balance and counterbalance is going to keep changing. So having conversations, trying things out, and then putting barriers into place where it's not appropriate is the only way forward.
The word that comes to my mind is curiosity, is like approaching everything with curiosity. Like, how was that? Did that work for us? How did we feel? How does that make you feel? And just as a leader, you have to kind of set that precedent yourself, don't you? Of not being defensive, not coming with a fully formed view and saying, well, let's talk. That's interesting. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about how that feels, which sounds perfectly easy, but doesn't maybe happen as much as it should.
I think it is really undervalued, that type of conversation, whether it's about AI or anything in the workplace, because we are so focused on time and efficiency. Creating the space for that kind of conversation just never happens unless you're being led by a really skillful leader who creates the space and time for that.
And it's actually, some might worry that that's a sign of weakness or not having all the answers, but actually it's the opposite, isn't it? It's being comfortable enough in your own skin to entertain some different points of view and to take the time to think about it. This podcast is brought to you by the best-selling How to Be A range of books. These books, authored by me, Jennifer Geary, in collaboration with other seasoned experts, break down roles such as the COO, Chief Risk Officer, Chief People Officer, and Chief Sustainability Officer into their component parts. They explain the technical capabilities you need, but also how to operate at this level, preparing yourself, getting to know your peers, engaging with culture, strategy, building your team, and much more. Over 30,000 books have been sold, and the books have received overwhelmingly positive reviews. There's even a book about the role of AI called The Augmented COO. Check out the books, available on Amazon and Waterstones now. You talked about return to office, I think more generally in terms of like hybrid working and, being pulled in 4 or 5 days a week and that kind of thing. You're also, Claire, very, very passionate about women returning to the workplace. And I know your white paper, this was one of the first pieces of work that you did. And you have a couple of headlines on your website. 70% of returners experience stress, anxiety, or even dread when returning to work. More than 50% of returners were unhappy with their treatment. So talk a bit about the problems that you've observed and where this kind of drive and passion came from for you.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's nice to hear those headlines being read back from someone else. So this is about supporting women back into work after maternity leave. And like many of these things, it was born out of personal experience. So I had my first child, my daughter, almost 7 years ago now. And my maternity leave wasn't that straightforward. So I was returning to work with a certain level of anxiety. This date was getting ever closer. My anxiety was matching that. But I had a day booked in with line manager to go back to the office. And I was working at a big consultancy at this point. Arranged the childcare and did my 2-hour commute as it was back then before pre-COVID. But I turned up at the office and was watching the time tick by. So 9 a.m. came and went, no line manager. 11 a.m., midday, still no sign, until eventually I got a text message later on in the afternoon, something really dismissive like, "Oh, sorry, totally forgot it was your first day back. Can we just rearrange?" And at that moment, my heart sank because I realised what had been probably the most important day of my career, the first time I'd been through a massive life transition, had not even registered. It wasn't even on his radar. And then I started to notice other clues and signs that both myself and other women returning from work were being devalued in terms of our talent and what we could bring. So as always, I then set about collecting data, and I did that through hearing people's stories. And I've now collected over 400 stories from women of all walks, all careers, all levels, from CEOs to bar staff, dog walkers to finance directors, and published it in the white paper. And as you've said, on the whole, people are not having a good experience of this. So at a time when we should be really demonstrating care and putting our arms around people and absolutely making the most of retaining that talent, instead people are experiencing bullying, gaslighting, being excluded from things. And something new I hadn't come across before, which I've kind of coined as forced masking. And it's where these women are being asked to pretend that they don't have children. And there was one woman I spoke to who said she was sat down by her line manager when she returned, and she was told, "Don't talk about the child at work. There are people here that don't have children and don't want children, so it's not okay to mention the child, but you can talk about your pets." So there's still some really dreadful treatment, and it's leading to a huge talent drain. You know, the female talent drain is massive at a time when we should be priming these women for senior leadership roles. And we wonder why there are less than 1% of FTSE CEOs that are women. It's because we're not taking care of them at these pivotal moments. But we did hear some positive stuff. There were some positives as well. And so I've categorised that into some, I guess, advice and tips for organisations that want to do a better job of this. And there are loads of places that I'm seeing and working with who do want to do better. So a couple of those things are line manager training. We know in the UK, our line managers are woefully undertrained when it comes to people management, but even more so when it comes to these really key life transitions. They need to know what they're dealing with and how to create a positive return environment. And then things like flexible working. If you want to employ working parents, it is a non-negotiable to have a watertight, flexible working policy, but also to see it in practice. It's got to be role modelled. It's got to be common around your organisation. And then we found some less obvious things as well. So one thing that really stuck with me was the skill of self-advocacy significantly improved outcomes for women returning to work. So if employers just invest a little bit of time upskilling these females on how to advocate for themselves, we saw significantly better outcomes. So being able to articulate what it is you need and why and how will help them to have a better return to work as well.
Oh, that's really interesting. I haven't heard that third one before, self-advocacy. One of the things I was proud to do when I was in Save the Children, so I was, the COO, I was the second in command, obviously a woman with 2 young kids at the time myself. And I hosted a couple of breakfasts for women returning to work after maternity leave as early as possible from when they came back. And they turn up and they're, makeup, and that, the morning that they've had and the night that they've had and that kind of thing. And what I said to them is that, first of all, I see you and I'm here for you and I've got you. But secondly, I can fully understand. I know you're here and all, bright. I fully recognize that you probably haven't had very much sleep last night, that you probably felt awful leaving the house this morning, torn, that maybe you've come in, maybe you're questioning whether you should have come back, maybe. Yeah. And what I just want to say to you is stick with it. I see you, it gets better. I've got you and I'm always here to talk to you about it. And I think sometimes just humanizing that and having a senior person able to say I'm here for you, I hope made a difference along the way.
Oh, I bet it did. That is just so special. And I bet, that didn't take a huge amount of cost, resource or time, but just noticing these people, just recognizing them and letting them know that what they're going through really matters to you. It will have made a world of difference, I'm sure.
for the cost of an hour of people's time and a dozen croissants, right? It hopefully gave people something to come, and maybe stop someone from going, oh, to hell with this, right? I just can't do it, and that kind of thing, because it's hard. It's really hard sometimes. I think I found for me, I think it humanized me, and being able, you said, like, don't talk about children. I remember what an icebreaker it sometimes was to go, oh, boy, I'm tired. I've had 2 hours sleep. Right, come on, let's go. But just something to kind of break the ice and break the tension and humanize yourself. I think I got better as a people person instantly.
And whether it's having children or whatever else you've got going on, those are the challenges that unite us as humans. And I think that is what COVID gave us. And being suddenly in people's homes, you got to see the struggle. Everybody's got something going on. Everyone's got children or dogs or elderly parents or some other challenge. And that is such a leveler, isn't it, to realise we're in the same boat.
Absolutely. And you get better outcomes, actually, and the defenses come down and so on. One of the things you touched on there, which I just wanted to pick up, was talent drain, the value of the human knowledge that we have. I mentioned to you, I co-authored a book with Anne Kiley, who is a chief people officer. She's been a Twitter, Aer Lingus, all that kind of thing. And one of the things that she was really keen that we brought out in our book about chief people officer was the value of human capital. We often think about it in terms of restructurings and in terms of like the cost of, getting rid of somebody's salary and benefits and that kind of thing. But to overlook the value of that built up knowledge, of the processes, of the know-how, of just knowing how to get things done and execute something, whether you're a manufacturing company or a consultancy or a knowledge industry. And, Anne and I put forward that we think organizations would take quite different actions if they valued that human capital in a different way. What's your take on that? Because all of this is basically based on we're undervaluing that talent.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And first of all, I absolutely agree with the sentiment in that book. I think so often organisations just see the bottom line saving of the salary, and they forget to take into account all the implicit knowledge. And I think you call it, how do we get stuff done? But there's also, for me, there's the cultural cost. And I think when you've worked in a team or an organisation for a long time, it's really easy to spot the people who are the cultural pillars. They are like glue. They bring people together. They impart passion, energy, purpose. And when you lose those people, you can't put a price on that. So I'd love to see somebody far more intelligent than me translate some of that into a cost that organisations can understand. So, losing Colin from accounts is going to save us 50 grand a year, but actually engagement will go down and productivity will go down because he's the only person that knows how to get shit done around here. Like, I'd love to see that.
And in a moment of conflict or challenge or something, we always used to look to Colin for guidance, because Colin, we trust his moral sentiment. We trust his barometers of culture. We call them culture carriers in Save the Children. There were those people through their work, through their engagement in the office that people would just go, oh, what does Colin think? And that was worth an awful lot more than Colin's salary.
Good old Colin.
Bless Colin. We salute you, Colin. So, Claire, all of this research, all of this work, the white paper, the 400 stories, as an author, you know where my next question is. This sounds like there's a book in there somewhere along the way.
Oh, now you're going to make me say it out loud. I might have to actually do it. But yeah, I do feel like I want to do justice to the stories that were shared with me. There were some amazing things in there, but also some incredible advice that came out of it. And I just think back to when I was off work and returning with all that anxiety. I would have loved a little book or a guide or a program to walk me through the first few months of returning to work. Here's how to prepare. Here's some really practical tips. Here's what to do when your child is sick. And here's how to advocate for yourself. If you want flexible working or you need to leave because your child is ill, here's how to frame it in a way that feels really professional and doesn't undermine your value at that organisation. So we've had an offline conversation, haven't we, about how that might come together in a book. I'd love to do it. As always, it's finding the time and opportunity to get it down on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, even with all your work, it is an endeavor, isn't it? And particularly when you're growing a business, it's a hard thing to do. But it was interesting that you went to the Advice for Women book. And here's an idea for me for free, Claire. I'll give you this one for free. But I immediately thought about the Advice for Organizations. And maybe there's a yin and a yang, or maybe there's two books, or maybe there's a companion or something like that. You know, the book for the women and the book for the organization mirroring each other. Best of luck with that. And it's going back a bit. One of the best books I read at the time was the one by the women of Goldman Sachs, 85 Broads, which was a collection of stories, all sorts of stories about women in the workplace, their career, about with children, without children, you know, all the challenges. And it just provided some role models, some acceptance of like all the different things that there are. But yours sounds like it will be very science-backed and data-backed, but very empathetic as well. I look forward to it, Claire.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's very kind of you.
So listen, last formal question from me. You mentioned it earlier and I had to pick it up. You recently did a Formula One pit simulation, which sounds so cool. Tell us what that was like and what you learned from it.
Well, yeah. So as I've already said, I love introducing an element of play and simulation in my workshops. So this sim was all based around a Formula One season. You had to build a team, design a car and choose your driver. And the focus was really all about critical thinking and decision making. And we chose Formula One because it's this incredible combination of high-tech cars, aerodynamic engineering, but these drivers who make split-second decisions that have really serious outcomes, right? It's life or death, it's winning or losing. And as humans, throughout the day, we make about 30,000 different decisions. So the vast majority of those are made on autopilot just to get through the day. And you'll know yourself, getting ready in the morning, dropping the kids to school, you can sometimes realise you've made 100 decisions, but not consciously thought about any of them. So the workshop was about slowing down your thinking, interrupting that autopilot and paying a bit more conscious attention to your decision making in order to achieve better outcomes.
And in an industry where sometimes a split-second decision is needed, sometimes there's more time maybe to make a longer decision as well. And in Formula One, there's so much strategy in it. I was a bit of a dork as a teenager following Formula One, but what I loved about it was the strategy, was the, you know, how many tire changes are we going to do? Are we going to fill up full with gas here now? Are we going to pit now? Are we going to not pit now? There is so much thinking in it, isn't there? As well as just engines and everything else.
It is fascinating. It's those split-second decisions. And what I love about Formula One is they're always experimenting. And that's what I always try and talk to my clients about, you know, in the workplace. Just try something and see what happens. And then you can always change your strategy. Just because you've got it written down on paper doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
There's nothing worse than stasis, is there? Just being kind of locked in and doing things and allowing permission. The first podcast I did here was with Dr. Max McEwen, who's known as the father of strategy. And, you know, the one thing he says is like strategy is not static. You know, when you're constantly reacting and responding to the environment. Claire, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Any final thoughts, anything you want to leave us with as we wrap up?
Well, go and read the white paper if you want to support women in the workplace and just the talent, you know, ecosystem in the UK. It's got some really practical tips. Please do read it, share it. It's free. I want to talk to people about that. In fact, that is the one thing I will do for free, is talk to you about women in the workplace. So please go and do that. But thank you so much. It's been lovely chatting with you.
Likewise, it's been fantastic, Claire. We will drop the link to your website and the white paper in the show notes. Listen, the very best of luck at the Entrepreneur of the Year Awards. As you said, you have already won, and look forward to the pictures from the red carpet and everything when they come. And congratulations, Claire, and wishing you all the best with your consultancy.
Thanks, Jennifer.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. For more information about the How to Be a books, the C-Suite Framework courses, the podcast, or to get in touch with me, head over to www.csuiteframework.com.